So Boeing has a new CEO, and for once he's not yet another manager in the long line of Boeing board insiders that we've seen in recent years. So who is Kelly Ortberg, and what kind of a person would even want to take on the laundry list of crises that makes up Boeing today? Stay tuned. August really didn't start out very well for Boeing this year.
To a new setback for Boeing's Starliner spacecraft and its two astronauts forced into an extended stay on board the International Space Station.
Boeing's Starliner spacecraft with the two astronauts docked on the International Space Station in early June for what should have been a week-long mission. But after several helium leaks and failures of 5 out of the 28 thrusters during the ascent to the space station, the astronauts are now awaiting a new plan for how to get back down to Earth, which might include a SpaceX Crew Dragon instead of the Boeing spacecraft.
Is Boeing's Starliner spacecraft up to the job?
But both NASA and Boeing remained adamant that the astronauts are definitely not stuck up there. Now, having said that, Boeing's main embarrassment at the start of August was actually not the spaceflight. Instead, it was the 2-day NTSB hearing on the events surrounding the door plug blowout of Alaska Airlines Flight 1282 back in January. Everyone knew that this hearing wouldn't go well for Boeing, and that's exactly what also happened.
This isn't a PR campaign for Boeing.
Now, I'm not going to try to summarize everything that came out of that hearing in this video, but it's worth pointing out that the NTSB usually doesn't even hold such public hearings before publishing its final reports. Usually, the NTSB instead publishes a docket on each accident, including all of the key information, and then we have to wait for the final report itself, which normally arrives a few days or a week later. But this time was different. The NTSB still released a docket, but then they also held this hearing, likely to drive home a point. Now, we will still need to wait for that final report to get the full picture of the accident, but based on what we've heard in the hearings, the investigators are looking at Boeing's safety and overall company culture as one of the key factors in that accident, and I'll get back to that a little bit later. But one person that didn't take part in this hearing on the 6th and 7th of August was Boeing's new CEO, Kelly Ortberg. Boeing had already revealed Ortberg as its new CEO on the 31st of July, but he then only took up his new job on the 8th of August, 1 day after the NTSB hearing ended. This definitely wasn't a coincidence, since the NTSB hearings had been scheduled months in advance, and to be fair here, since Ortberg is a Boeing outsider, keeping him away from those NTSB hearings sort of makes sense, at least for now. So, who is Kelly Ortberg? Well, a few weeks ago, I made a video where I looked at the different people who I thought would probably succeed Dave Calhoun as Boeing's next CEO. And Kelly Ortberg was not one of those. In my defense though, nobody else had put forward Ortberg's name until then either. As far as I know, the first publication to actually mention Ortberg's name as a prospective Boeing CEO was The Air Current, who did so less than a week before Boeing's official announcement. But anyway, Robert K. Kelly Ortberg has a degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Iowa. He started his professional career at Texas Instruments back in 1983, before moving over to Rockwell Collins in 1987. Over the years, Ortberg then slowly kind of rose through the ranks of Rockwell Collins before becoming the company's CEO in 2013. Among other things, Rockwell Collins made avionics, in-flight entertainment systems and other electronics and equipment for all major aircraft manufacturers, including Boeing and Airbus, and they also supplied quite a few systems to NASA. Under Ortberg's leadership, Rockwell Collins acquired other companies in its field like Air Inc. and BE Aerospace, and they eventually also merged with United Technologies to become part of Raytheon, now called RTX. This means that Ortberg has extensive experience in negotiating mergers and handling company acquisitions and reorganizations, which he will definitely have to use in his new role. On top of that, he has also been involved in the running of other businesses in the aviation and automotive industries over the years, and he retired from his last position in RTX in 2021. Now, Right off the bat, many in the industry are making quite a few positive noises about Ortberg because as an engineer and a Boeing outsider with extensive aviation industry experience, he is exactly the sort of person that many Boeing watchers wanted to see as the company's next CEO. As I explained before, it was Boeing's own airline customers that basically forced the company to start the process of changing its management, and going for someone like Ortberg as opposed to, let's say, an insider like Stephanie Pope, who is now Boeing's commercial airplane CEO, by the way, is something that the airlines and the lessors will likely approve of. However, one slight issue with Ortberg is his age. He's 64 years old, and Boeing typically wants their CEOs to be no more than 65 when they retire. But that isn't a deal breaker though, since Boeing's board previously gave Dave Calhoun a waiver until the age of 70, and they have already done the same thing with Ortberg. But still, like I mentioned in my previous video on this topic, some would have liked to see the next CEO to be able to stay for at least a decade as a way to ensure longer-term stability. But now we are really nitpicking. With so many urgent, short-term problems for Boeing and their new CEO to fix over the coming months, longer-term stability is definitely much lower down on the priority list. So where should he begin then? How does an outsider like Ortberg start to fix a giant like Boeing? Well, as I explained previously, Boeing's decline didn't just happen overnight. It has been a process that's been brewing for well over 2 decades, all the way back to from when Boeing acquired McDonnell Douglas in 1997. So how does someone begin to reverse such a long-term trajectory? Well, it is obviously still very early days in his tenure, but Ortberg seems to have made quite a few small encouraging moves already. And I'll explain what those are after this. Now, if Boeing's new CEO is going to lead them into the future, he will need to stay way ahead of the learning curve in this rapidly evolving industry. And speaking about learning, today's video is sponsored by Brilliant, an excellent platform for anyone looking to deepen their understanding of STEM subjects like data analysis, mathematics, programming, tech, physics and AI. Did you know that Brilliant was actually my first ever sponsor? They supported me when no one else did, and I am so proud to tell you about them because they are really great at what they do. Each lesson on Brilliant is crafted by award-winning teams from MIT, Duke, Microsoft, Google and others, and they have ensured that you will not just be learning there, you will actually become a better thinker. One course that I would recommend for you guys is Predicting with Probability, which provides a hands-on experience in extracting predictions about the future from weather and airline data. So by the end, you will know how to work with probability mass functions, joint and conditional probabilities, as well as Bayes' theorem. If this sounds interesting to you, use the link here below or this QR code to go to brilliant.org/mentor now and get started. If you use that link, you will get 30 days absolutely free access to check it out and then 20% discount on the annual subscription. Thank you, Brilliant. Now let's continue. In January of 2020, Dennis Muhlenberg was ousted as Boeing's then CEO following the devastating 737 MAX crashes and the long uncertainty that then followed. This crisis had also caused Boeing to fall out with the FAA, and the recertification of the MAX therefore seemed to be months away. Calhoun was a Boeing board member, a long-time GE guy and a Jack Welch protege, but even so, when he got the CEO job in 2020, those around the company were prepared to give him a grace period of sorts, since everyone understood just how precarious the company's financial position was at the time. A couple of months later then came the full brunt of the pandemic, and as devastating as that was, the upside for Boeing was that, well, the airlines were in no longer any big rush to get the deliveries of their new 737 MAXes. Now, like Calhoun, Ortberg is now starting his CEO journey with Boeing at a precarious period for the company, but there is now very little patience. Boeing faces a lot of problems, and several of them absolutely can't wait for a solution. Now, whenever I make a video about Boeing and its many problems, some viewers complain that I'm just bashing the company unnecessarily. So what I'm about to do now is to go through all of the main problems that Kelly Ortberg will need to address as a CEO in the next few weeks. So if you're a Boeing fan, brace yourself. Because Boeing has to address production issues at its 737 manufacturing facility at Renton, and they also need to look at different but similar problems which are slowing down their 787 production over in North Charleston. Because of these problems, aircraft production rates for the 737 and the 787 in particular are alarmingly low right now. You see, after the door plug blowout in January, the FAA restricted Boeing's 737 production to 38 aircraft per month as a maximum, but in practice, Boeing are not able to produce anything even near that number. At the moment, their 737 monthly production rate is in the 20s, and at one point it got as low as 8. Similarly, the 787's production is in the low single digits, and to give you some references here, a fully recovered Boeing should, according to Liam News, be making over 50 737s and 10 to 12 787s per month. Now those numbers will likely take years to get back to, and even then Airbus will still be making way more single-aisle jets than Boeing is, but that's a different problem. Then there is the certification of the 737 MAX 7 and MAX 10, which depends on required design changes on the engine NTI systems of the MAX family, and those are still quite some time away. The certification of the bigger Boeing 777X has made some progress lately, but it's still a loose end. Over on the military and space side of things, Boeing also still has some housekeeping to do with its KC-46 military tanker, the Boeing Saab T-7 Air Force trainer, the VC-25 Bravo, which is probably better known as the next Air Force One, and of course the Starliner spacecraft. On top of this, Boeing needs to get their finances in order, both for their commercial airplanes part and the military and space operations, and at the same time they also need to complete the acquisition of Spirit Aerosystems in order to bring that back into the company. That operation will include the reintegration of 2 production sites in Wichita, Kansas and Tulsa, Oklahoma. And that deal will take at least until the middle of next year to complete and will cost Boeing around $8.3 billion. But then there is the small matter of mending bridges. A lot of different bridges. You see, Boeing has to repair its relationships with, well, basically everyone. Its suppliers, its customers, regulators like the FAA in the United States and EASA in Europe, the NTSB, and perhaps most importantly of all, their own employees. And this brings us to what will probably be the first confrontation that Kelly Ortberg will face as Boeing's new CEO. For some months now, Boeing has been in negotiations with the IAM District 751, the local chapter of the International Aircraft Machinists Union for Washington State. This union represents 32,000 Boeing workers, and a new 10-year contract is due to be signed in September. Now, Boeing and this union have had a quite confrontational history in previous years, to say the least, and the workers haven't forgotten how it ended the last time, which makes their current demands, well, quite broad.
Corporate greed isn't gonna fly!
Retirement that was stolen from us on January 3rd, 2014!
You see, the last time Boeing's CEO was Jim McNerney, a guy who likened his own negotiating style to Darth Vader's, and he negotiated painful cuts with both worker unions and the company's main suppliers. That was back in 2013, a time when the job market looked very different from now, and it was also a time when Boeing was working out their plans for the next new airplane, the 777X. And McNerney threatened his workers that if they didn't accept serious cuts, he would set up the production for that jet somewhere other than in Washington State, basically threatening their jobs if they didn't sign. But this time, this year's negotiations are coming at a time when it's Boeing's turn to be the one with no negotiating power. There's now no new Boeing plane being launched that Boeing could use to threaten to make elsewhere, and even worse, today Boeing isn't the kind of dominant, skilled worker employer that they once were. Now, Boeing's starting pay for many skilled positions is comparable to that of baristas and food delivery drivers around Seattle. So not only has Boeing been really struggling to hire people lately, they've also lost many workers who retired during the pandemic, making things even worse. Before 2020, over 50% of Boeing's machinists in the area had 6 years of experience or more, and now that number is below 25%. So what is the union demanding then? Well, according to John Ostrower in The Air Current, this is what it looks like. The Machinists Union wants a 40% wage increase over 3 to 4 years, the elimination of mandatory overtime, a seat on the Boeing board, a say or a more elevated role in Boeing's safety management systems, plus full coverage of healthcare costs which the workers lost under McNerney. There are also more demands to do with the restoration of other terms and conditions like time off work, and the union wants to have a say on where Boeing will assemble its next all-new aircraft, whenever it comes. In a recent vote, the union members approved strike action if their demands weren't met, and Boeing absolutely cannot afford a strike right now. That would delay their 737 production ramp up even more at a time when the airlines and the lessors just can't handle any more aircraft delivery delays. And by the way, IAM 751 isn't the only workers' union that's active in Washington state. There's also the SPEEA, the engineers' union, whose contract expires next year, and they have their own long laundry list of demands to reverse McNerney's handiwork from a decade ago. So you can be absolutely sure that they will be following this process very closely. Now, I am sure that Ortberg knew everything there is to know about Boeing's current situation, including everything that I've just listed and likely much more than that. And he still decided to come out of retirement and take this on. So what is he going to do? Well, one of the very first things that we learned about Ortberg's intentions is where he will be based. In his first statement as CEO, he said, "Because what we do is complex, I firmly believe that we need to get closer to the production lines and development programs across the company. I plan to be based in Seattle so that I can be closer to commercial airplane programs." Now, that is quite a big departure from previous Boeing CEOs, but before we get too excited here, I should point out that this doesn't necessarily mean that Ortberg is about to move Boeing's headquarters back to Seattle, something that I know that many in the industry would love to see. This really just means that Ortberg wants to live in Seattle, which still has some significance. You see, one of the many criticisms of David Calhoun was that he lived in New Hampshire and South Carolina and didn't visit Boeing's headquarters very frequently, even after they moved to Virginia in 2022. So, in Ortberg's case, it will probably be more interesting to see how frequently he travels between the company's sites rather than what he will do with the headquarters, at least to begin with. On his first day as CEO, he visited the 737 assembly site in Renton, and the week after that he flew over to visit Spirit's main site in Wichita. But according to the Air Current, another early move of Ortberg's was to change Boeing's chief communication officer. And some language that he used in his first statement offers some encouraging signs that, at the very least, he has done his homework on Boeing's recent history. Ortberg started that message this way: "Team, I can't tell you how proud and excited I am to be a member of the Boeing team. While we clearly have a lot of work to do in restoring trust, I am confident that working together, we will return the company to the industry leader we all expect." Now, the phrase "working together" has very special significance for those who are working at Boeing. This phrase was first used by Phil Condit, who previously led the development of the Boeing 777, and later Alan Mulally, an engineer who took over the 777 after Condit became CEO, and whom many want to see succeed Condit in that role. Now, sadly, Mulally was eventually passed over, and later he moved and basically saved Ford Motor Company from bankruptcy. But here, maybe some of you are saying, did Ortberg really mean to use "working together" this way, or am I reading a little bit too much into this? Well, one of the things that Ortberg is remembered for at Rockwell Collins is for getting rid of things that could create hostilities among co-workers. Things like special parking spots for top managers, including his own as CEO. And in another really interesting development, Alan Mulally, who has generally avoided talking about Boeing since his move to Ford, has now stepped in to sing Ortberg's praises as both a manager and an engineer, and at least to me that says a lot. Mulally also revealed that while working at Rockwell Collins, Ortberg actually had a hand in designing many of the avionics that made the 777 the success that it eventually became, and he added that Ortberg is someone who can make employees feel safe about flagging problems. And that is probably the single most encouraging thing that I've heard about Boeing's new CEO. Because frankly, out of all of the challenges that Boeing is now facing, the biggest of all, including those unions, is fixing Boeing's overall safety culture. You see, ultimately, Boeing doesn't really have a problem with the 737 MAX, the 787 production, the Starliner spacecraft, or even the Air Force One. No, Boeing has a Boeing problem, which manifests itself in costly ways and, of course, in the case of the MAX crashes, extremely tragic ways. Without a doubt, Ortberg's biggest challenge will be to create an environment where Boeing's people feel that they can raise their hand when they see that they've made an honest mistake, knowing that their company has their back. And that was not what the NTSB reported during its hearings this month, where employee after employee made identical lawyer-prepared statements ending with the line, "I have no knowledge." I don't know, I just have a very good feeling about this guy, and I really hope that that feeling will prove to be correct. Now, I have saved the end of this video for Dave Calhoun, the previous CEO. Scott Hamilton in Leham News points out that the long laundry list of things that Ortberg now needs to sort out is basically the same list of problems that Calhoun did not fix during his tenure at the company. And one of the last comments that Calhoun made before his departure was that he thinks that Boeing's latest management change isn't intended to be a large leadership overhaul. Now, I'm going to hazard to guess that most people in the industry probably want Calhoun to be completely wrong about that. I have already made a 3-video series on the story of Boeing's decline from an engineering powerhouse to an industry problem child, and I encourage all of you to watch that one if you need more context on the latest news. But I just really hope that in a few years from now I will be able to make 3 more videos about Boeing's fantastic turnaround and rebirth. But what do you think? Can this happen, and could Ortberg be the one that gets this ball rolling? Let me know in the comments below. Again, I want to send a fantastic thank you to the members of my Patreon crew. You see, my mission with both of my channels is to inform but also to work on improving safety and understanding of the aviation industry, and you guys in Patreon are really helping me to achieve that goal. There are links to join my Patreon crew in the description here below, where you can also find some cool merch and links to my sponsors. Have an absolutely fantastic day wherever you are, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.